The narrow canyon was filled with echoes of gunfire and fear. The SEAL team crouched low behind jagged rocks, their breaths heavy and shallow, the sun already sinking behind the mountain walls, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The enemy had them boxed in from three sides, and every sound carried like thunder in the cold, thin air. Bullets struck against the rock face, sending sparks into the air. Chips of stone rained down on the men as they tried to stay hidden. Radios hissed and crackled with useless static. Every call for support answered only with silence. The sky was heavy with clouds, thick enough to block the eyes of drones and aircraft, and the team realized the air cover they had trusted would not come. Sergeant Morrison pressed his back against a slab of granite. Sweat running down his temple despite the freezing air, he glanced at his men and saw the fear in their eyes, but also the resolve. No one spoke loudly. Only whispers moved in the space between bursts of enemy fire. The canyon was a dead end, the only way out blocked by hostile squads that were tightening the noose with every passing minute. From the left flank came the rattle of machine guns, hot and endless, chewing through the cover like an unstoppable saw. From the right flank, small groups were moving in, shifting quickly across the higher ledges, their rifles trained downward on the trapped Americans. Morrison's second-in-command whispered that they were being herded, pushed into a kill zone, and if they did not find a way out soon, there would be no way out at all. The SEALs tried their radios again, praying for the comforting voice of command, but the mountain had swallowed the signals. Only static answered them. Only the sound of empty airwaves filled their headsets. It was as if the entire world had gone silent and forgotten them, left them alone in the stone cage. The men checked their ammunition. Low counts glared back at them, magazines half empty, grenades already used, supplies running thin. Their enemies were patient and many. They had the numbers and the high ground. The SEALs had courage, but courage alone could not shield them from bullets forever. Corporal Hayes muttered that this was it. They would not make it out. He thought of home, of his wife and daughter, but he forced the words back down and steadied his rifle. No soldier wanted to die, but if it came, he would not let it be easy for the enemy. The canyon grew darker as the sun sank deeper. The temperature dropped, and every breath came out as mist. The enemy voices echoed, sharp commands in a language the SEALs did not understand. The footsteps on the rocks were growing closer. Every sound told them the end was near. Morrison whispered orders: keep heads low, keep firing only when you see movement, make every bullet count. But inside, he knew the truth. They were outnumbered, outflanked, and out of time. He thought of his family, of the oath he had taken, of the lives of his men who trusted him to lead them, and he felt the crushing weight of failure pressing down on his chest. Then the sound came, sudden and sharp, not from the canyon floor but from high above. A rifle shot, clean and perfect, echoing across the walls. The enemy machine gunner who had pinned them from the left flank dropped instantly, the weapon falling silent in mid-burst. The canyon went quiet for a split second, every head turning toward the ridge above. Another shot rang out, this one cutting through the air like thunder. One of the flanking soldiers fell backward, his weapon clattering against the rock. Then, a third, precise and exact, dropping another hostile before he could aim. Confusion rippled through the attackers, voices shouting in alarm, boots scrambling for cover, the careful trap they had built now unraveling before their eyes. The SEALs looked upward, their hearts pounding. The ridge that had been marked on the map as empty, inaccessible, abandoned, was alive with unseen fire. The bullets were not random. They were placed with surgical precision, every shot removing a threat, every shot giving the trapped men another breath of hope. Whispers passed between the SEALs. Who is up there? Is it friendly support? Is it another unit? But command had given them no word of reinforcements. Their radios had been dead. So who was firing with such perfect skill? Morrison's eyes stayed on the ridge, his voice low as he breathed words that chilled his team to the bone. Someone is up there watching us, and whoever they are, they just turned death into survival. The canyon was still dangerous, the enemy still many, but the balance had shifted. The sound of those unseen shots had cracked the fear that was closing in. The SEALs adjusted their positions, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance, all because someone hidden above had chosen to fight from the shadows. And as the smoke of battle thickened, the legend of the unknown shooter began, a legend that would change everything that followed. The canyon air was heavy with silence after the sudden shots. The SEALs pressed against the stone walls, hardly believing what they had just seen. Enemies who had moments ago looked certain of victory were now scrambling in fear, their perfect ambush broken apart by fire from an unseen hand. Another shot cracked across the mountains. Sharp and clear, the sound rolled like thunder through the gorge. One more hostile dropped where he stood. The attackers shouted to each other in confusion. They searched the ridge lines but could see nothing. No flash, no figure, only the deadly rhythm of precise bullets echoing from above. Morrison's team stayed low, their hearts pounding, every man counting the seconds between shots. The unknown shooter was not wasting ammunition. Each trigger pull was measured, each strike exact, and it was clear that whoever fired knew the canyon better than anyone. The SEALs exchanged glances, whispering through clenched teeth. Who is up there? What kind of marksman can shoot like that? The enemy's advance slowed, hesitation spreading through their ranks. One by one, they retreated into the shadows of the rocks, afraid of exposing themselves. The canyon that had felt like a tomb now felt different, as if invisible eyes were watching from above and controlling the fight with unseen hands. Corporal Hayes breathed out in disbelief. He whispered to the others, "This is not random support. This is someone who has trained for years, maybe decades, someone who sees the ground like a map drawn in their mind." Morrison stayed silent, his eyes locked on the ridge. His instincts told him the truth. Whoever this ghost was, they were not a stranger to war. At the command center far away, officers leaned toward their screens, listening to broken radio fragments. Their monitors showed only static, yet scattered reports began. To arrive, unidentified sniper fire from Ridge 13, accuracy beyond documented range. Some officers argued no one could operate at that altitude. The wind shear alone made shooting impossible. Others sat in silence, knowing that stories like this had been whispered before. Stories about a forgotten shooter who appeared when no one else could, back in the canyon. Another round rang out, this time cutting through the barrel of a heavy machine gun before the gunner could fire. Sparks flew. The weapon fell useless to the ground. The enemy squad panicked, some firing wildly into the empty ridge, others falling back to cover. The balance of fear had shifted, and the SEALs could feel it like electricity in the air. Private Jensen gripped his rifle tighter, his voice barely a breath. "This is impossible. No one can shoot like that." Morrison finally answered with words that chilled his men. "I know that pattern. 3 years ago, during another mission, a similar sequence of shots saved an entire convoy. They called it the 327 sequence. Nobody knew who fired it, nobody ever found the shooter, but I think they are here now." The same legend returning when no one expected. The team looked at their commander with wide eyes, part fear, part hope. The thought that a phantom guardian might be fighting with them sent a shiver through their bones. The canyon was still filled with danger, yet courage began to return. For every enemy movement they heard another echoing shot. Not random, not desperate, but calm and exact, breaking the enemy piece by piece. High on the ridge, the figure remained unseen. The wind whipped across the snow-covered rocks, the air thin and sharp. But the shooter moved with practiced ease, calculating distances, adjusting for wind shifts that came every few seconds, breathing steady, heartbeat calm. The rifle was not just a weapon, it was an extension of memory, of discipline, of promises made long ago. The SEALs could not see this figure, but they could feel the presence, like a shadow standing beside them, unseen but undeniable. Morrison ordered his men to reposition, using the distraction to secure better cover. Step by step, They regained control of the canyon. The ambush that should have been their grave now became a battlefield. They could survive. Enemy commanders shouted in panic, their voices echoing across the stone. Their careful plan had collapsed. Fear spread like fire through their squads. The hidden sniper had stolen their confidence, and without confidence, an army cannot fight. Morrison knew they had been handed a second chance. But the mystery grew heavier with every passing moment. Who had taken that first shot? And why had they chosen to reveal themselves now? At the command post, a senior officer whispered to another, "Do you remember the file about Cerberus Echo, the lost team in the Northern Line operation? One survivor was never confirmed," they said. "She vanished into the mountains, never returned." The other officer shook his head. That was years ago. Impossible to connect, yet his eyes betrayed the same unease. Impossible had already become reality in this canyon. The SEALs kept their eyes on the ridge whenever the gunfire paused, waiting for even a glimpse of their rescuer. But nothing appeared. No shape, no shine of a scope, no trace of life. Only the certainty that someone was up there and that someone was fighting for them with unmatched skill. As darkness thickened and the air turned colder, the enemy finally began to pull back, their voices fading into the higher passes, the sound of boots and scrambling gear slowly disappearing. The canyon grew quiet, except for the slow, steady breath of the men who had nearly met their end. They were alive not because of their own fire, but because of a ghost on the ridge. Morrison finally whispered into the stillness, "Whoever you are up there, we owe you everything." The canyon answered only with the faint whistle of wind and the weight of silence. But inside each man, a single thought burned bright. They were not alone, and legends sometimes walk beside you unseen. Night spread across the mountains like a heavy blanket. The canyon below still echoed with the memory of shots. The SEALs stayed together, whispering in disbelief, their hearts unsettled, every man thinking of the ridge above and the ghost who had saved them. Yet none of them knew the truth. The truth that stretched back years into forgotten files and broken missions. Far away in dusty archives, there were records stamped with red ink, pages marked classified, words erased or blacked out, but between the lines a story waited, the story of a unit called Cerberus Echo, a team of 6 highly trained operators sent into the Northern Line mountains. Their task was deep reconnaissance, to track enemy supply routes and mark artillery positions. They had moved silent like shadows through the frozen passes, unseen and unheard, until the day everything went wrong. The mission had started with calm. The team moved with skill, but the intelligence they had been given was false. The valley, they were told, was empty, was in truth alive with enemy forces, bunkers hidden beneath snow, weapons stockpiled under the cliffs. Cerberus Echo had walked into a trap far worse than anything the SEALs now faced in Grell Canyon. The fight that followed was brutal. The 6 operators held their ground for 3 days against overwhelming numbers. They split into positions, 3 on the ridges, 2 covering the valley floor, 1 sniper above all watching every angle. They fought not to win, but to buy time. Below them, a convoy of civilians was moving through the valley, refugees fleeing the war, mothers and children, the elderly, all depending on the soldiers above to hold back destruction. On the first day, 2 members of Cerberus Echo fell, holding a ridge until their ammunition was gone. On the second day, 2 more were lost, covering the retreat of the survivors. Only the sniper and 1 partner remained. But by the 3rd day, the partner was gone. 2, leaving only the one called 327, her designation whispered in later reports, her real name forgotten or hidden. She stayed in position while the mountains swallowed the rest of her team. She should have left. She should have abandoned the ridge before the enemy closed in. But she saw what was coming, artillery being moved into place, enemy spotters preparing to call fire on the convoy. If those guns opened, the valley below would become a grave for 200 innocents. She made her choice. 3 shots fired in. A calm rhythm, each one striking down an observer before he could relay the order. Those 3 shots became legend. The convoy escaped, the refugees survived, but the sniper had revealed her position. The hunt began. An entire battalion searching for one survivor. They swept the cliffs, the caves, the frozen rivers. But she did not break. She moved with the mountain. She slept under stone ledges, drank melted snow, ate from ration crumbs when they used heat scans. She moved only during storms. When they sent dogs, she hid her scent beneath layers of frozen earth. She became invisible, not a soldier anymore, but a ghost, stitched into the land itself. After 6 days, rescue came, but what they found was not the woman who had entered the valley weeks before. They found a figure gaunt and silent, her eyes sharp but distant, her rifle still in her hands, her scope still aligned to the valley where her team had fallen. She had not moved from her post even as frost ate at her fingers. She was alive but different, alive but marked, alive with a memory she would never bury. The official files wrote that Cerberus Echo was lost, killed in action, bodies unrecoverable. But those who had seen her knew there was one survivor, one ghost. She refused medals, she refused recognition, she refused to tell her story. Instead, she requested technical roles far from combat, mapping, communications, analysis, anything that kept her away from rifles and from the voices of the dead that followed her into sleep. But skills like hers do not vanish. Instincts carved into the body do not fade. She could not stop reading the wind. She could not stop memorizing terrain. She could not stop hearing the silence between sounds, so even in quiet roles she remained dangerous, unseen, underestimated, always carrying the shadow of Ridge 13 inside her, now in Grell Canyon, as Morrison and his men whispered about the impossible. Shots, the pattern of fire that had saved them. The truth was simple. The ghost on the ridge was no stranger. She had been here before, 3 years earlier, in another canyon, in another trap, in another fight where the world had turned its back and she had stood alone. The designation 327 was not random. It was carved into shell casings, whispered in reports, feared by enemies who had never seen her face, respected by allies who never knew her name. She was not supposed to be part of this mission. She was not supposed to be in combat at all. Yet when the SEALs were surrounded, her silence broke, her rifle spoke, and history repeated itself. Back at command, the officers argued. Some said it was impossible. No sniper was deployed, no authorization given. Others leaned into the silence and remembered. They had seen the same thing before, the same impossible accuracy, the same cold patience. They knew what it meant, but dared not say it aloud. For legends belong to whispers, not to official reports, on the ridge above the canyon. The ghost reloaded calmly, her breath steady, her eyes never leaving the enemy positions. She had promised herself never again to watch comrades die when she could act, never again to let a trap close while she had the power to break it. That promise had pulled her back into the fight. That promise had awakened the legend once more. And down in the canyon, the SEALs realized they were living inside a story that had begun long before them. A story written in snow, blood, and silence. A story that still had many chapters left to unfold. The night air grew sharper as the fight dragged on. The canyon walls carried every echo, every sound bouncing back until it felt like ghosts were whispering in every shadow. The SEALs stayed pressed low, their hearts racing, their breaths heavy. But their eyes always drifted back toward Ridge 13, the place where the unknown shots kept falling like thunder. Enemy forces regrouped, angry shouts rising in the darkness. They tried to circle once more, to force the team deeper into the canyon, but every time a commander raised his voice, another shot cut him down. Every time a squad moved into position, one of them dropped before they could fire. It was not random. It was not luck. It was careful calculation. Each strike timed with a calmness that only came from someone who had lived through battles far worse than this one. Morrison whispered to his men to keep low, to conserve ammunition. He knew their mysterious ally was buying them minutes, but he also knew those minutes would mean nothing unless they found a way out. The canyon was still dangerous, still filled with enemies, and the SEALs were still, trapped in the center like prey. Yet something inside Morrison told him they were not abandoned. Someone had chosen to stand with them in the shadows, and that choice carried weight back at the command post. Officers stared at their screens, reports arriving in fragments, unknown sniper fire confirmed. Shots coming from Ridge 13, authorization questioned, denial repeated, no friendly assets in your sector. The words felt empty. The proof was written in the battlefield itself. The enemy was falling, the SEALs were alive, and it was because of someone the system refused to admit even existed. The enemy tried heavier weapons. They carried a mortar into position, setting it quickly on the ridge above the SEALs. One soldier prepared to fire. But before the round left the tube, a bullet pierced the steel. The weapon exploded in a flash, fire lighting up the night sky. The survivors scattered in panic. Their plan shattered before it could begin. Morrison and his men ducked from the shockwave, then raised their heads in awe. One unseen shot had saved them from certain destruction. Private Jensen whispered with trembling voice, "This is not just a sniper. This is someone who knows every stone, every gust of wind, every trick the mountain can play." Hayes nodded in silence. He knew the stories, the whispers of the one called 327, the ghost who had lived when all others fell, the ghost who returned when soldiers were about to die. Could it be that she was real? Could it be she was here now, fighting beside them in the darkness? On the ridge. The shooter adjusted the scope, the breath steady, the eyes sharp, the body calm against the biting wind. Calculations rolled silently, distances, wind speeds, angles, everything flowing like water, years of memory carried through muscle and instinct. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only the knowledge that every trigger pull meant a life saved below. The enemy realized they could not win head-on. They began to pull back toward the control station they had been protecting. Their leaders shouted orders, but fear had already taken root. One by one, they disappeared into the higher passes, leaving behind weapons, supplies, and broken plans. The canyon grew quieter with each passing minute, until only the whisper of wind and the pounding hearts of the SEALs remained. Morrison seized the moment, ordering his men to move. They climbed out of the kill zone, securing higher ground, their rifles scanning the shadows, every sense alive. When they reached the abandoned enemy position, they found crates of equipment, maps, and communication gear. The control station now empty, left behind in the chaos. What had started as certain defeat was now turning into victory. Still the question haunted them. Who was on Ridge 13, who had turned their grave into survival? Morrison pressed his radio again, whispering into the static, "Identify yourself, confirm friendly position." But no reply came. Only the silence of the mountain, only the faint whistle of the cold night air at the command center. Frustration grew. Officers demanded answers. Radar confirmed shots fired from extreme range. Pattern analysis showed a sequence matching the legendary 327 incident. But no official name appeared. No authorization file existed. Some called it a coincidence. Others looked away and said nothing because legends were not meant. For paper, legends lived in the unspoken places between truth and myth. The SEALs climbed higher, trying to reach the ridge, their boots slipping on frozen stone, their lungs burning in the thin air. But when they reached the top, they found only empty ground, only scattered shell casings glinting in the moonlight, and one unfired bullet placed carefully on a flat stone, engraved with 3 numbers, 327. Hayes lifted it with shaking hands, his voice breaking. "It is her. It has to be her." Morrison stared at the bullet, his chest heavy. He had heard of her years ago. A survivor no one was supposed to know. A sniper who carried silence like a weapon. He whispered quietly, "Thank you," though the ridge was empty and no shadow moved. Yet somehow he knew she had heard. Somehow he knew the ghost had chosen to reveal herself just long enough to keep them alive. The team regrouped. Their mission now changed, no longer just about survival, but about carrying the truth that legends walk among them. As they prepared for extraction, every man kept glancing back at Ridge 13, half expecting to see her shape against the moon, half knowing she would never be seen, because some saviors never seek recognition. They only seek to keep promises that others have forgotten. And so the impossible rescue was complete, not by numbers, not by superior fire, but by the unseen hand of a shooter whose name remained hidden, whose presence remained a mystery, yet whose bullets had rewritten the ending of the canyon fight forever.